morning, and welcome to Morning Movie News, where today's episode has a theme. And as you know, if you're a regular viewer of this show, I love when I can have a theme. And this is a full house. All three stories and the viewer question. What's the theme today? Representation of many different groups. And I think it's an ever-evolving conversation, which seems to be making some real headway as of late. Or is it? Because the political situation in this country is getting very tumultuous because there seems to be a very big movement against representation and diversity. So as things seem to improve, there does seem to be a conflict up ahead. We'll see how it resolves itself. But moves are being made, and that's what we're going to discuss today. And again, this is all different types of representation. So the first one I want to talk about, though, is Asians in Hollywood. George Takei has done a wonderful job being the spokesperson. He pretty much, decided to take that role upon himself very admirably, I think. And also I think there's a lot of goodwill towards George Takei, not only because of his history on Star Trek, but because, I think over the past couple of years, he's become like a pop culture figure, right? He was a gay rights activist for a while as well, but I think he maybe feels that's going a little bit better, and now Asian representation in Hollywood needs his attention. And I think he's put out some really good arguments for it as of late. He was really spurred to action, as were many people, by the jokes that Chris Rock made at the Oscars this year. But anyway, there was a big story yesterday about a movie that's going forward that seems to be progress, but I don't know. It's called Crazy Rich Asians, and it's based on a popular book, and Jon M Chu is set to direct, who is one of the top Asian directors working today, James Wan, Justin Lin, and Jon M Chu. There's much more success behind the camera for Asians right now than there is in front of it. But anyway, Jon M Chu is going to direct this movie, and what it is again, based on a book, and there's actually been a sequel to the book, so the book has a very high success rate. Hollywood loves that. And the story is that there's an Asian American who's going to, she's engaged, she's going to get married, so she decides to go to meet her fiance's family in Singapore. But he neglected to tell her that he's from an incredibly wealthy family, and when she goes back there, not only is she met with instant celebrity because they're such a big name in Singapore, but there are so many other people who would rather marry her fiance and are trying to get her out of the picture. Also, a lot of people don't want to see her marry her fiance because, it's that whole, oh, you're an American, you're from a different country, what's so great about your family, we'd like a marriage of prosperity, etc., etc. And that's something that you see all the time in the upper classes, not marrying for love so much as corporate mergers. So anyway, I'm not sure how this will do. I'm glad it's based on a successful book, and Jon M Chu tweeted, he said, he was so happy because every single major role would be an Asian actor. But is that really representation, or is that going to have your own party over there, being well, if you won't let us participate in your movies, we'll just make our own. But I think that was a strategy utilized, of course, by quote-unquote black film, and they were so successful at the box office. Tyler Perry, for as much as everybody likes to make fun of him, really kicked things off with his movies. They've been so successful, and they've shown that they're such a strong audience that you're starting to see more crossover and less, clear-cut divisions between who movies are made for, right? So I think that's fantastic. But the question is there a really big Asian audience in the United States? Sometimes a movie from China will make it into the top 10, or at least will do well, or a Japanese film. So I think if this is going to work, they'd have to cast someone, get some new talent in there, of course, but you'd have to bring in some stars, some Asian stars that are a box office draw, right? Because, the black films did really well, black films, because they had talent that people really liked, and that was in front of and behind the camera. And to be honest, I don't really think Jon M Chu has a lot of fans, right? He did G.I. Joe Retaliation, the Gem movie, Now You See Me 2, and apparently Now You See Me 3. I don't think anyone's what's Jon M Chu doing next? I got to support him. I think James Wan would have been a better choice. And Justin Lin, he's going to go make Space Jam too. But anyway, I'm curious what you think of this. If you're a part of the Asian community, and also if you're not, is it representation to have your own separate film? Do you think that audiences outside of the Asian community would be interested in this film? I think that, I think it's important. I think true representation is to get Asian characters that are major players in major films that aren't supposed to, target any particular demographic. That's obviously the holy grail. Now, is this a start like with what happened with black film? I'd be curious to know if you agree with that. All right, so that's the first story of the day. Now, the second story of the day is, it's cheating a little bit, but it counts as representation. And then we have something about, we're going to talk about ageism for the last two things, male and female. But Guardians of the Galaxy is apparently going to become a ride, California Adventure. And so the gist of this story is Marvel representation and other property representations at Disney, and if Disney is potentially losing its identity, right? So that's what we're going to discuss. So anyway, here's the setup. Guardians of the Galaxy, obviously very popular property for Disney, and they have a sequel coming out in 2017. So rumor has it they're going to turn the California Adventure Tower of Terror ride. They can't do this in Orlando because they have a contract with Universal, which must have an end date at some point, but not soon apparently. That they can't put any Marvel properties in the Orlando theme park because Universal Studios Orlando has an exclusive on that. It's just dying there, although the Spider-Man ride there is quite excellent. But anyway, they're only going to do this in California Adventure. So Tower of Terror will at least live on in Orlando. But I'm sure all the other Tower of Terrors will be reskinned if this is successful. So they're going to take Tower of Terror, and the rumor is make it into a prison escape kind of sequence, like from the first movie, that prison that they all find themselves in. Now, I must admit, that sounds like a pretty cool ride, right? And I can see that very easily adapting to the Tower of Terror skeleton, right? But Tower of Terror, I put a poll about this up last night on Twitter. So I like doing polls on Twitter. So if you follow me, you can participate in them. It's fun to see what everybody thinks. But I asked people, I said, how do you feel about this? And the number one response was, don't touch it. It's a classic. But someone did respond and say, who the heck knows what Twilight Zone is? It's such an old show. It's not an IP, right? It's not a brand. But I think that, Tower of Terror, the Twilight Zone is something that everybody knows. It's like I Love Lucy. It's one of the most famous shows of all time, right? And I think that's a little disrespectful to that. And I think that I think it's a loser's game to just be constantly being like, what's new and hot right now, right? Because if you're doing that, you lose the timeless quality that I think is so intrinsic to Disney's success. And Disney, though, I think, in their defense, they have a lot of really popular brands right now, right? They've acquired Pixar, Marvel, Star Wars, and they want to get those properties into their parks, especially as the competition steps up from the other theme parks, like Universal. But I think that they have to understand that Disney has always been able to beat those other studios because of their cozy factor, right? And again, that timeless quality, the playground that Walt built. And I think that if you just make it seem like, Comic-Con to some degree, I don't really know if you're going to keep people coming back, because a Disney vacation ain't cheap. So I think that if you want to make people feel like it's worth that value and not just a day park, it's something that you can go to for several days, I think that you have to really protect that. So I think that this is all coming from, they recently got rid of the Maelstrom ride at Epcot, in the Norway Pavilion to put a Frozen ride in. I think this is Disney having to deal with the fact that it takes a really long time to build a ride from scratch. And so in a race to get a Frozen ride up there and a Guardians of the Galaxy experience up in time for the sequel, they are kind of sacrificing popular attractions that they already have. I don't know. I would have preferred them to redo Rock and Roller Coaster, but that isn't at the California complex, Disneyland or Disney California Adventure. That's only in Orlando, and of course they can't do that there. So we'll see what happens. I'm curious to hear everyone's thoughts on this and how you feel, if you think Disney's doing a good job juggling their different properties, and do you think it's important to retain like that Disney magic, or do you think this qualifies? All right, so that's the second story of the day. Now, the third story, as I said, has to do with ageism. And we're first going to talk about male actors and a very interesting situation that's developed for poor Russell Crowe. Now, as I'm sure you recall, Russell Crowe used to be like one of the best actors working in Hollywood. Everybody wanted this guy. After Gladiator, he was magic. But he really hurt his career with that cell phone throwing incident where he chucked his cell phone angrily at, I believe, a hotel employee. And he was actually brought in by the police. Never really recovered from that. But why we're talking about it today is that I was very surprised to see that Russell Crowe, there was a big headline in the Hollywood Reporter, and they said, Russell Crowe offered the role of Dr. Jekyll, who of course turns into Mr. Hyde, as a cameo in the upcoming Tom Cruise The Mummy, which is currently filming, but the idea is he would eventually have his own movie, right? Part of the Universal's Monster Cinematic Universe that's being built. But what was fascinating is when you actually read the article, it said he was the third choice. And I was like, wow, how much has Russell Crowe fallen that he is the third choice for something, right? Especially when I think he's a pretty good choice to play Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But apparently Tom Hardy was the first choice. I can see that. However, I think, and also, well, Javier Bardem was the second choice, who's also an older actor. But what's interesting to me also on that is that Tom Hardy and Javier Bardem are so open to blockbuster work, right? I mean, they're these really respected actors, but they're so willing to do blockbuster films. Like Javier Bardem is in the upcoming Pirates of the Caribbean. Tom Hardy was going to do Suicide Squad, but that didn't work out with his scheduling, but he's always open to do other things. I don't know if they should be a little bit more exclusive, to try and protect their images, or maybe, Tom Hardy in particular, he really needs a franchise. Although I'm rooting for him to be the new Bond. I think that would be great. So anyway, maybe that's why he turned it down. So I thought that was funny, though. But also, I think it's interesting that as this Monsters cinematic universe takes shape, it seems to really be encroaching on the space that Penny Dreadful has carved out for itself on Showtime. I know there are some of you who are very big fans of that show, but it's not a huge hit. It's not like Game of Thrones. So I think there's space for Universal to muscle them out, right? I don't know if they can coexist. But then also, even this article brought it up, The Hollywood Reporter, that there's the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And it seems that they're kind of doing a de facto version of that. Although I don't see any female characters brought up yet, and it's important to realize that Mina Harker from the Dracula mythology was the leader of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and was a fantastic character. And also I would point out that Eva Green on Penny Dreadful, who kind of is Mina Harker to some degree, she certainly looks like the illustration from the Alan Moore comics, is big on Penny Dreadful. So you have a really big history of female leads in these properties, and at least the Mummy's going to be female, but I'm surprised they haven't found any characters to bring into this world. Right now they have the Invisible Man, Johnny Depp, Tom Cruise, who's going to be dealing with the Mummy, but obviously will stick around because he's Tom Cruise, and now Dr. Jekyll. But I'm curious, this sounds pretty good to me if they can pull it off, but that's a big if. Because people have tried to work in this space before and it's very tricky. But I'm curious for Penny Dreadful fans, how do you feel about that? Are you like, come at me, Universal? Or are you like, no, leave me alone, I love my show? Okay, so poor Russell Crowe. All right, so I think, I hope Nice Guys helps him turn his career around. I think he's a good actor. I think, we should remember that. All right, so finally, the viewer question also has to do with ageism. So it's from Dan Mooney. And he has 3 little emojis of raising a hand. And it says, hey, Grace, question. Recently, you've been talking about diversity in film, but mainly in terms of race, ethnicity, and gender. I think when actors get older, although he will have less chances, he will have opportunities to act. Look at Harrison Ford and Samuel L. Jackson. However, for women, there are not many mainstream 50-plus role models apart from perhaps Helen Mirren and Meryl Streep. My question is, what do you think should be done about the opportunities for older actresses so they are represented better in film? Well, I think first off, ageism, right? I think that there's a lot of work to be done as to the value of women in society, right? I mean, there's ageism overall, right? Where everyone feels like once you get old, you're yucky, right? Or you're senile, and like that's just simply not true. I mean, I remember when I was little, Jay Leno used to have guests on who were over 100, and they were all sharp as a whip. I mean, unfortunately, tragically, some people, have dementia set in upon them, but some people don't. And so I think that Hollywood, what else is new, really does a disservice by misrepresenting the reality of the situation. So anyway, that's one thing. But also, I think women are viewed in entertainment often as eye candy, right? Like a number of us have been discussing over the past few days, the idea that Vision is going to be hooking up with Scarlet Witch, but there's such a huge age difference between the actors playing those characters, and it's supposed to be like, whatever, man, it's cool. I think that's unfortunate. So I think that's something that needs to be worked on. But I think that no one's going to make opportunities for anyone else is really the sad truth of it, right? I mean, you might get a situation like Crazy Rich Asians, right? But who's directing that? Jon Chu. So that's an Asian taking things into his own hands. Oh, and by the way, I wanted to add Maggie Smith to the list of older actresses working today. Helen Mirren, Meryl Streep, and Maggie Smith. But I think that in every single situation here that we're talking about with representation, I think that it's up to the group that wants to be represented to take the matter into their own hands. Like, look at Will Packer, the producer of so many quote-unquote black films. He's done so much to advance the cause. Tyler Perry, these are key figures. Malcolm D. Lee, the Straight Outta Compton gang with Straight Outta Compton. I mean, they really did a lot to push this forward, and it's incredibly commendable. And I think that and also Lee Daniels with Empire, bringing that to television, and also what's going on with Kenya Harris, or Kenya Barris, I think, over with Blackish, right, and all the work that he's getting. So people need to create these opportunities, right? And that's a whole other conversation about getting to a position where you can create these opportunities. But, independent film, I think anyone can get in there if they can, get some funding together and make a good movie that can get some attention at the festival circuit. So that's one way to go. That's the route Ryan Coogler went, and it's worked out very well for him. So with older actresses, they can't just sit there and be like, why won't anyone write a part for me? They need to write a part for themselves. And I think a great example of this is Lily Tomlin and Jane Fonda, who are the executive producers of their Netflix series, Frankie and Grace. So they created that opportunity for themselves. And I think that's very commendable. But I would also point out, though, that the reason that the show doesn't have mass appeal is that it's very targeted in its demographic, right? It's like, it's appealing to older women, right? The show's like, it's a show made to promote older women, by older women, for older women. But, look at something like The Golden Girls, which was incredibly successful and beloved by everyone. It was not targeted at a specific demographic. And it's interesting, one has to wonder why that had crossover appeal, but Frankie and Grace does not. It might be that Netflix is too small a platform, and perhaps the show just hasn't gotten the media support that it needs to be a breakout phenomenon. But anyway, so that's what I think has to happen. I think that you need to create your own opportunities, and I think you need to make them something that everybody would want to watch, right? I think that would be really important, because then not only are you changing people's perception of what, breaking down stereotypes, I think that's important, but, you're giving yourself a better success factor. Like, how many older women of the same age of Lily Tomlin and Jane Fonda are, like, into TV, right? I mean, that's like a really small demographic, right? Who want to watch, like, Netflix, no less, right? Like, how old is then you have to look at Netflix's subscription demographics. Like, what are the age groups there? I think Netflix is just, like, on a spending spree to get as many stars and shows there as they can. We'll see over the next few years if they continue to be so prolific, because we have no idea what the results are. But anyway, I just think that's a really important thing to stress. So I think that actresses really need to, just get out there. And while it would be great if there were more roles for them, then maybe part of what they can do is to lobby screenwriters and studios and directors to say, well, couldn't you change this role to have me play it? Like, they should be getting scripts to their agents, because there are a lot of actresses out there who don't work anymore who would still qualify as a name, right? People are like, oh yeah, I remember you. You used to work a lot. I've heard your name with big movies. Go get scripts, go through them with a fine-tooth comb, and be like, I could play this director of the CIA. It doesn't have to be a guy. I could play this doctor, right? Just go and be like, can you please change the role for me? Just be proactive. I think that's really important. Especially today, I think people are listening. But we'll see if that continues as the political climate it goes through a thunderstorm coming up here in the United States. All right, so that's today's morning movie news. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please be sure to write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and that viewer question, anything you'd like us to cover tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.